to prove that the woman herself could get pregnant without a male. She went to the mountains alone and stayed for 7 days and nights. When returned, she mysteriously gave birth to me. Everyone said she was possessed by a spirit from the mountains. A wolf, a snake, or a wild boar. She never explained the rumors in the village. Simply raised me quietly and steadily. Although I didn't believe my father was a beast, her behavior became more and more strange. What I couldn't understand the most was, she would go out on the 3rd of every month. No matter if it was windy or rainy, she was always away from home. At first I didn't know what she was doing outside, but as the villagers began to gossip, calling me a monkey child or a wolf child, I couldn't listen to it anymore. One time on the 3rd I secretly followed my mother. I eventually discovered that she had gone up the mountain alone. I waited until evening before seeing her come down from the mountain exhausted. From that day I knew, maybe I really am the child of a monster. Otherwise, why would my mother go up the mountain on the 3rd of every month? I thought my mother would never miss it, until one time when I was picking fruit from a tree. I fell and broke my arm badly while picking fruit. She took care of me day and night for 3 days and nights. This included the 3rd of that month. I remember that was the first time she stayed home on the 3rd. She looked especially anxious at the time. She waited until I had recovered before going up the mountain. What was different that day was that she came back very late and extremely exhausted. I didn't dare ask about it, thinking it would just pass. After all, nothing happened when she stayed home on the 3rd. The day after she returned, she did something that I never expected. She spent half the day stitching 2 words onto a piece of cloth. She hung it outside like a sign. I then realized it said fortune telling. At that time I couldn't believe my mother could tell fortunes. After all, fortune tellers under the bridges are all talkers, convincing people with their words. My mom never spoke like that. How could she be a fortune teller? After this got around, some people came just to watch the joke and ended up giving it a try. After all, my mother only charged 10 yuan for a fortune telling, very cheap. Some were drawn in and my mother read for them. In less than 3 minutes my mom had written it out for me to read. When I said it out loud, it turned out to be accurate. In just 3 short months, my mom became a famous fortune teller in the area. Besides being accurate, there was one rule that also made my mother even more famous. That was she would stop fortune telling once she earned 30 yuan a day. She charged 10 yuan per reading. No more, no less. That meant she only did 3 readings a day. Even if someone offered her 100,000, she wouldn't do it. And she made sure I remembered this rule. But my mom's routine of going up the mountain on the 3rd of every month never changed. That day, just like every 3rd of the month, she made breakfast for me early, and said she had something to do and went out. I really wanted to follow her up the mountain to see, because last time I only saw her go up the mountain, but I wasn't sure what she was doing up there. What if I could finally see my father, whom I hadn't seen in 15 years? At dawn after my mother left, I planned to secretly follow her up the mountain. Just as I was about to close the door, Zhang Chongsheng from the neighboring village suddenly blocked my door. He was a dealer in antiques. Whenever he found something new, he would come over and pay 10 yuan for my mom to do a reading. He wanted to know if he could make a profit, things like that. I told him that my mom wasn't doing any readings today. Zhang Chongsheng urgently pushed me back inside. He said if my mom wasn't home I should give him advice. I looked at Zhang Chongsheng's forehead and saw it glowing. His nose, the part that represents wealth, was also slightly reflective. This was a sign of incoming wealth. It meant that the treasure he received yesterday could bring him profit. At this point, Zhang Chongsheng pulled out a red envelope and handed it to me. Li Yi, I know you have some skills. Help me out and I'll give you a big red envelope. Seeing the red envelope, I told him what I had just seen. On his face, he seemed surprised, thanked me and hurried out the door. However, as he reached the door he tripped and fell. When he got up, it seemed like he had stepped on something in his pocket. He pulled it out and started swearing in front of the door. I walked over in confusion and saw that in his hand, he was holding a seal that looked like an imperial jade stamp. The bottom of the seal had some ancient characters, though I couldn't see them clearly. However, this scarecrow-like seal's left hand had broken off during the fall. This antique could sell for a lot of money. Now that it's chipped and broken, it's ruined. I instinctively looked at his face. I noticed that the shine on his nose had disappeared. Without the wealth sign, it meant this seal wasn't valuable anymore. After Zhang Chongsheng cursed and left, I quickly ran toward the mountain. But halfway there I froze, because I saw that my mother was actually turning back. What was going on? Every 3rd my mother would always go out for the whole day, rain or shine. I thought I had seen it wrong, but I hadn't. My mother had broken her routine on the 3rd again. I quickly hid and watched. My mother hurried home with quick steps. Confused, I couldn't resist sneaking back. I secretly peeked through the window in my mother's room. The curtain was slightly open and I saw my mother close the door. She was searching for something in the cupboard. There was a lot of sweat on her forehead, as if her body was in pain. Seeing her like this, I was naturally shocked. Could it be that my mother missed her appointment today because she fell? I was anxious and wanted to go in to ask, but I saw her take a box from the cupboard. But just then her left hand seemed to snap as if it was fractured. I was so scared I quickly ran inside. My mother looked at me, her face full of surprise. I hurriedly helped her and tried to take her to the hospital. But my mom patted my head and said stay at home and don't run around. She said this and endured the pain realigning her dislocated hand. Then she walked out again. She never uttered a word of pain the entire time. On the third she still didn't miss her appointment. Even with a broken hand she still had to go. What was she doing up the mountain? I was so worried so I hurriedly followed her. But by the time I reached the foot of the mountain, I realized my mother had already gone up. I searched for a long time but couldn't find her. I could only return home disappointed and wait. Every third of the month she would always return home by 6 p.m. sharp. I thought today would be no different. Before I reached home, I saw Zhang Chongsheng, the man who had asked for a reading earlier. It seemed like he had been waiting at my door for a long time. I saw Zhang Chongsheng, the man who had asked for a reading earlier. It seemed like he had been waiting at my door for a long time looking anxious. I thought he had come to ask for a reading again. I was about to refuse but he looked at me and said I've been waiting for you for a while. I left something at your house, open the door, let me in to get it. I shook my head thinking could this guy be confused? He never even entered my house earlier, how could he have left something? I looked at him speechlessly. I noticed that the area above his eyebrows was unusual. This area is what we call the place that shows a person's moral character, known as the feud palace. This part of his forehead happens to have a red mark indicating that something has caused it. This is a sign of moral deficiency. This means this guy is about to do something bad. But there's nothing valuable in my house. He can't possibly be planning to steal something from my house. I opened the door and asked him what he had left behind. After all, we run a business. Customers often leave things behind. Usually I put them in the cupboard. I walked toward the cupboard by the door. And suddenly I heard the sound of someone running away. I walked to the door in confusion and found he had already run off without looking back. Helpless, I turned around and saw a seal on the table. Next to it was a severed hand. Wasn't this the strange seal he broke earlier at my house? The one he dropped when he fell this morning? I couldn't be bothered with it, feeling worried. I sat down watching the door, waiting for my mother to come home. Bored, I looked at the seal on the table. I looked at the seal Zhang Chongsheng had left on the table. I noticed 3 characters engraved on it, Mountain God Seal. I thought it was a pity that the seal was broken like this. So I thought I might as well just glue it back together. I took some glue from the room and applied a bit to both ends. I directly glued the broken arm back together, restoring it to its original form. Then I placed it in the cupboard where I usually keep. I placed it in the cupboard where customers usually leave their forgotten items. I figured that when Zhang Chongsheng remembered he would come to ask for it. After all, it was an antique, as they say. I decided to let him find it in the cupboard by himself. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard the sound of the door opening. I opened my eyes and saw that my mother had returned. I instinctively said, "I'm hungry." She nodded and went to the kitchen. Then I suddenly noticed that her left hand, which had been broken earlier, was now healed. I walked over and gently squeezed it. Curiously, I asked where she had gotten it treated. She smiled gently with a hint of pain and said, "Be good. Go play, don't touch it." My arm feels a bit stiff. It feels uncomfortable, like there's something inside the bone. This was the first time she spoke so much to me all at once. I hurriedly stepped back and didn't dare to touch it. I obediently went to wait in the hall. After a while she finished making the meal and I ate. Afterward I returned to my room to sleep. The next morning I opened the door ready to start the business. But I saw my mother sitting on a chair, constantly massaging her left arm. It seemed like something was really uncomfortable inside. I hurried over and suggested, "Why don't you go to the hospital again?" She shook her head and sighed. She stood up and said, "I have to go out today." I couldn't help but say, "But today is the 4th. My mom said she knew, and then turned and left. Seeing this I actually felt relieved, because I guessed she might be going to see another healer. Afterward I was bored and watched TV at home. Suddenly I noticed Zhang Chongsheng sneaking around in front of my door. I helplessly walked out and asked, "What's going on now?" When he saw me, his expression was as if he had seen a ghost. He told me to go stand in the sun. I asked him, speechless, what he was trying to do. "Where's your mother? She's not doing business today?" he said as he walked in and looked around the house as if verifying something. I told him she had gone out. "When she's gone it means there's no problem." Hearing that my mom had left, he began muttering to himself again. "If she's gone then it's all fine." What a jerk, he actually lied to me, saying something like that thing can't be touched. Damn, he just doesn't want me to be happy. At this point Zhang Chongsheng suddenly turned his head and looked at me. "Li Yi, where is the thing I left on your table yesterday?" I rolled my eyes at him. "It's in the cupboard, take it yourself." He opened the cupboard and found the seal. To his surprise it was perfectly fine. He took it out confused and asked me what happened. He even asked if I could repair antiques. I shook my head and said I just glued it together. He immediately exploded, "This is an antique. If you don't understand, don't mess around. This glue is so visible, how am I supposed to sell it?" After being scolded by Zhang Chongsheng I could only feel awkward. But after thinking about it, he was right. After all, it's an antique. If glue can fix it, I might as well be a master craftsman. Thinking this, I walked over and said, "Why don't you break it again and have someone properly repair it? Anyway, it's only glue that holds it together now." Zhang Chongsheng snorted, "I've learned my lesson." He carefully took out a box and placed the Mountain God seal inside. Worried it might break again, but I thought he didn't really need to do that, because the bridge of his nose which represents wealth wasn't shining, even though he had placed the mountain god seal inside a golden box. It wouldn't bring him a single penny, even if he placed the mountain god seal inside a golden box. It wouldn't bring him a single penny. After placing everything in the box, Zhang Chongsheng left directly, but I suddenly noticed something strange about his face. His forehead seemed darker. What was going on? After he left, I continued watching TV in the hall, but by 6 a.m. my mom still hadn't returned. I was worried that her broken hand might have caused her to fall somewhere, so I hurriedly left a note on the table, saying that I went out to look for her. Then I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, but just as I ran out I saw a figure in the darkness. I hurriedly shined the flashlight. I found it was Zhang Xiaoshu from the neighboring village. He can fix anything, from broken pots and pans to antiques and jade. He can repair them all. Zhang Chongsheng usually asks him to fix the damaged antiques. When they get damaged, he's the one they turn to. But today Zhang Chongsheng should be looking for him to fix that mountain god seal. Why did you come to me? I greeted him confused, but he looked at me with a bad expression. He kept shining the light at me which felt really glaring. I asked him what he was doing. He mumbled a few words before walking over. Li Yi, did Zhang Chongsheng leave a strange seal at your place yesterday? I nodded and said, what's going on, Uncle Zhang? Hearing this, he lowered his voice and looked at me seriously. Li Yi, there are some things I need to tell you. Stay away from Zhang Chongsheng. He almost harmed you and your mother yesterday. I hurriedly asked, what do you mean? I don't think he was joking. How did he harm us? The seal is of the mountain god. Do you know what that means? I said I know a little. The mountain god is the deity of a mountain. They are usually spirits that have cultivated into beings. After hearing what I said, he nodded. The one he had wasn't just an ordinary antique. It was the identity of the mountain god. It's like our personal ID card. However, when we lose our ID, we can simply go and get a replacement. But if the mountain god loses their ID, it can't be replaced so easily. This would cause chaos on the mountain. They might even lose their identity as the mountain god. That's why the mountain god will do anything to get their seal back. No matter what it takes. Whether it's killing people or eating them, they will reclaim it. Especially if it's broken, the mountain god is likely to be enraged. At this point, Zhang Xiaoshu couldn't help but glance around instinctively. It seemed like he felt something was watching him. Hearing this, I got a little nervous. No wonder when Zhang Chongsheng put down the mountain god seal yesterday. I could tell from his face that he was up to something shady. So it was the misfortune being led away. I felt frustrated hearing this, but I was also puzzled. I placed the mountain god seal in my house yesterday. No one came over though. Zhang Xiaoshu shook his head. It's not a person, it must be some kind of animal. Think carefully, was there anything unusual last night? Like a rat, a snake, or a weasel, anything like that? I thought about it carefully and shook my head. There was nothing unusual. Upon hearing this, Zhang Xiaoshu was also puzzled. Could it be that the mountain god can't track the mountain god seal? How could that be? Unless there's something that wards off evil in your house. My house doesn't have anything like that. We don't even have a small deity statue, let alone anything to ward off evil. Zhang Xiaoshu suddenly became strange and took a few steps back. Could it be your fault? Wasn't it the case that your mother went up the mountain for 3 days and came back with you? Maybe you are the son of the mountain god. So the mountain god seal stayed in your house overnight. Even the god wouldn't do anything to you. That's why you and your mother escaped the calamity. I helplessly said, I'm human through and through. How could I be the son of a demon? Zhang Xiaoshu didn't continue saying anything. He probably didn't believe it that much. I asked, what kind of spirit is the mountain god around here? Zhang Xiaoshu quickly shook his head and said, those who have seen the true form of the mountain god all have to. I don't want to see it. I already told Zhang Chongsheng not to touch the mountain god seal. I told him not to touch it, but he insisted on doing so. I don't care anymore. Let's go, he said, then turned and left. I quickly followed him. He asked me where I was going. I said my mother went out and hasn't come back, so I'm going to look for her. So the two of us arrived at the village entrance. Zhang Xiaoshu hesitated for a moment and said, I'll go and try to persuade that guy. Throw away the mountain god seal quickly. Otherwise we don't know what will happen. The mountain god's anger is no joke. After saying this, he walked towards Zhang Chongsheng's house. I hesitated for a moment and then asked him, can the mountain god seal still be repaired? He shook his head and said, anyway, my skills are not enough. If the mountain god seal is broken, the mountain god will also be affected. If I repair it randomly and make a mistake, I'll be in trouble. Just as we were heading to Zhang Chongsheng's house, Zhang Xiaoshu, who was walking in front, suddenly shivered and shouted, what the hell is this? I was already startled enough when he said that. I quickly shined the flashlight. I noticed there was some movement at Zhang Chongsheng's house. It sounded like clothes tearing. It was quite chilling in the middle of the night. Zhang Xiaoshu gritted his teeth and walked to Zhang Chongsheng's door. He picked up a shovel to steady himself and called into the house. Chongsheng, are you in there? As he spoke, Zhang Xiaoshu pushed the door open. Halfway through the conversation, it seemed he saw something. Suddenly he turned and fled. He ran out in fear, his face full of terror. The mountain god is angry. I saw Zhang Xiaoshu suddenly rushing out. I hurried over to try to support him, but Zhang Xiaoshu used both hands